Hi there. This is my sixth commentary on Quality by Robert M. Pirsig. And the section I'm going to read and comment on today is Part 2, Values. Starts with a variation on the Tao Te Ching, the first stanza. The quality that can be defined is not absolute quality. The names that can be given it are not absolute names. It is the origin of heaven and earth. When named, it is the mother of all things. Quality is all-pervading, and its use inexhaustible, fathomless, like the fountainhead of all things. It says it's after the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, modified by Robert M. Pirsig in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, 1974. So, the fountainhead of all things. A lot of this chapter is going to explain that, and that is something that if you are studying or are interested in the metaphysics of quality or Bob Pirsig's work, is a little bit difficult as a concept that's a little bit difficult to wrap your mind around, so this chapter is going to help with that. All right, so what this chapter is comprised of is a few snippets from letters and an edited section from Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance where where his thought process involving quality, the evolution of his thought, and the conclusion, basically the conclusion, so to speak, of his thought on quality occurs. It's heavily edited. It's at the end of the book. I neglected to look up what chapter. Something in the 20s, mid to late 20s. So one thing I want to say about letters that are in this book is it's interesting because you don't really get much material that isn't oriented around 1974 when Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance was published, or 1991, 2, 3, 4, in response to Lila, except for that section where he was in the psychiatric ward, my favorite section, where the origins, where he has the seminal thoughts in those aphorisms of metaphysics of quality. So the first letter is September 13th, 1994. Dynamic quality is here all the time, engulfing both subject and object, and people become more or less sensitive to it as they become detached from existing static patterns. So I want to talk about the Pageaus for a moment, or especially Mathieu Pageau and the language of creation, which my book club, who we first did Zam and then we did Lila, and now we're on the language of creation. And one thing that is part of the symbolism, the biblical symbolism, but you're talking about metaphysics in general, of Western metaphysics in general, is this notion, this is the origin, I think, of that, because these are the very early marriage of Platonic and Christian metaphysics that characterize our thinking anyway. So in the language of creation, the flood is an important symbol. And look what he says here about engulfing both subject and object, and people become more or less sensitive to it as they become detached from existing static patterns. Okay, so what Pirsig is saying there is kind of the state of mind, the non-dual state of mind that is characteristic of mysticism. But the other thing that reminds me of Pageau is the symbolism of the flood, or the symbolism of water is the symbolism of dynamic quality in a lot of ways, because it's the potential, that the patterns, it's the water that the land arises from in Genesis. And that's like a basic symbolism that that you could say is both is dynamic and static quality, or you could say is potential and actualization, but it's an essential, but the flood in the land is an essential way of understanding that in an early consciousness that gave birth to biblical symbolism that we still live with today. All right, the next section, and this is the most of the chapter, is this section, which is again heavily edited, documentation of the evolution of his understanding of what quality is. Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance and Inquiry into Values, 1974. Some things are better than others. That is, they have more quality. And just right off the bat, think about that. You know that to be true. But when you try to say what the quality is apart from the things that have it, it all goes poof. There's nothing to talk about. But you can't say what quality is. How do you know what it is? Or how do you know that it exists? If no one knows what it is, then for all practical purposes, it doesn't exist at all. But for all practical purposes, it really does exist. So there's two kinds of way of looking at practical purposes. One, how things are defined in a sort of rational way. And rationally, quality doesn't exist. But practically, in terms of if you're trying to identify variables in a rational way, something ephemeral as quality can't exist in the practical sense of rationality. But in the real practical sense of lived experience, it most certainly does exist. But for all practical purposes, it really does exist. What else are the grades based on? Why else would people pay fortunes for some things and throw others in the trash? Obviously, some things are better than others, but what's that betterness? So round and round you go, spinning mental wheels and nowhere finding any place to get traction. What the hell is quality? What is it? I think there is such a thing as quality, but that as soon as you try to define it, something goes haywire. You can't do it. So take a moment and, a little exercise. In your mind, try to define quality. I think that when you try to do that, you're going to feel like a little bit uncomfortable and stumped, and then you'll sort of go into descriptions. But there's going to be a moment of kind of stuckness when you think about how you are going to define quality. A few days later, he worked up a definition of his own and put it on the blackboard to be copied for posterity. The definition was, quality is a characteristic of thought and statement that is recognized by a non-thinking process. Because definitions are product of rigid formal thinking, quality cannot be defined. So, this is a description of the cognitive process of quality, and that's about as close as you're going to get if you're trying to define it. The fact that this definition was actually a refusal to define did not draw comment. The students had no formal training that would have told them that the statement was, in a formal sense, completely irrational. And that was a good thing that they don't have that training, because it opens them up to this exploration of the classroom experiment that was where the whole understanding of quality came from. The whole demonstration that quality does actually exist came from. That one essay, 99% of the class will pick a better essay over a worse essay almost objectively. It's not exactly objective, but only a few people will pick the one that most people think is worse. So the majority picks the higher quality essay, which in a way demonstrates that we understand what quality is, even though we can't define it. If you can't define something, you have no formal rational way of knowing that it exists. Neither can you really tell anyone what it is. There is, in fact, no formal difference between inability to define and stupidity. When I say quality cannot be defined, I'm really saying formally, I'm stupid about quality. And to a formal, logical, rationalist, that is going to be a hell of a deterrent. If you can't fit it in logically into your system, then you're going to try to explain it away. And that is certainly what happens with ephemeral things in systems like that. But then below the definition on the blackboard he wrote, but even though quality cannot be defined, you know what quality is. And the storm started all over again. What he meant by quality was obvious. They obviously knew what it was too. And so they lost interest in listening. Their question was, all right, we know what quality is, how do we get it? If you've read Lila, there's a section where he's talking about a pop song that you hear, and it's very exciting, and then it loses its excitement once you kind of process it. You know, you listen to a song over and over and over, and eventually you kind of lose interest in the song. You say, oh yeah, that's a good song, and but it doesn't capture you the way that it did in the first moment. So this is what happens once you process an idea. So they process the idea of quality, and now they want to actually apply it. He singled out aspects of quality such as unity, vividness, authority, economy, sensitivity, clarity, emphasis, flow, suspense, brilliance, precision, proportion, depth, and so on. And these are all rough intellectual categories, specifically when it comes to writing. Kept each of these as poorly as defined as quality itself, but demonstrated them by the same class reading techniques, which I talked about before when you compare. He showed how the aspect of quality called unity, the hanging togetherness of a story, could be improved with a technique called an outline. The authority of an argument could be jacked up with a technique called footnotes, which gives authoritative reference. Outlines and footnotes are standard things taught in all freshman composition classes, but now as devices for improving quality, they had a purpose. And if a student turned in a bunch of dumb references or a sloppy outline that showed he was just fulfilling an assignment by rote, he could be told that while his paper may have fulfilled the letter of the assignment, it obviously didn't fulfill the goal of quality and was therefore worthless. So you're using these, the point he's making is the rubric for an essay are not what create a quality essay, but they're tools to hold an essay together. So you can ramble on in a quality way and get something really exciting and wonderful in your essay. But if it doesn't cohere, if it doesn't, after the fact, it needs to cohere and hold together, which is why to be a creative writer, you really do have to kind of go down into, this area of, let's just say, this dynamic way of writing, and then you size it up later. If you start with trying to fulfill the letter of the rubric, then you're going to have something that's really not very good. And so he's trying to turn his students away from trying to fulfill the requirements and write a quality essay, and use the requirements to edit, size up, contain the quality essay. Now, in answer to that eternal student question, how do I do this? That had frustrated him to a point of resignation. He could reply, it doesn't make a bit of difference how you do it, just so it's good. The reluctant student might ask in class, but how do we know what's good? In the past, the student would say, this is what's good if it fulfills the requirements. But almost before the question was out of his mouth, he would realize the answer had already been supplied. Some other student would usually tell him, you just see it. And if he said, no, I don't, he'd be told, yes, you do. He proved it. So there's an evolving away into, away from the standard way that a student thinks an essay should be written, and in a way of really writing well, making a quality essay. And so that's an exciting evolution in terms of the ability of these students to write essays. And you could also say that there's something of a spiritual transformation in this evolution as well. You're seeing things through a different lens. You don't see them through a rigid lens of fulfilling, a list of fulfilling a list of what you need to do. You actually allow yourself to enter a realm of more uncertainty and allow a more intuitive process to guide you, and then as an interface between other people or society, then you use the rules to convey that. So there's sort of a spiritual element to this evolution as well. He had to answer the question, you can't define it. What makes you think it exists? His answer was one belonging to an old philosophic school that called itself realism. A thing exists, he said, if a world without it can't function normally. If we can show that a world without quality functions abnormally, then we have shown that quality exists, whether it's defined or not. He therefore proceeded to subtract quality from a description of the world as we know it, and that is that dystopian 1984-like scenario that he proposes where no one gets pleasure out of anything. There's anything that you get pleasure out of, you just get rid of because no one, because pleasure is of value, and so you get rid of anything that has, except for things that just keep you alive, basically, and you end up with this dystopian nightmare. They've edited that out for the purposes of this book. The purely intellectual pursuits were the least affected by the subtraction quality. Now, that's a very interesting statement. If quality was dropped, only rationality would remain unchanged. So let's go back to the rubric of the essay. You have the letter of the law of what you need to survive, and if you fulfill that, or what you need the essay to be, and if you feel that, then according to rationality, you're done. But reality is that there is so much more to it than just fulfilling the letter of the law. By subtracting quality from a picture of the world as we know it, he'd reveal a magnitude of importance of this term he hadn't known was there. And that's so interesting because when he's chasing the ghost of reason, there is something in his mind that says the way we see rationality, the way we see reason, there's something wrong with it. I don't think he's discounting, he's not discounting reason altogether, but the way we apply it as if that's all there is to it, because, the viewpoint, the Enlightenment viewpoint, let's say, and of course he's going to go way further back than that, is that reason is really all you need. That we're very advanced, and we get rid of all that old superstitious stuff, and we're just reasonable, and then the world can go on. And you have people like that today who say that. I mean, they don't act it out, but they say it, like Steven Pinker and Sam Harris. The world can function without it, but life would be so dull as to be hardly worth living. In fact, it wouldn't be worth living. The term worth is a quality term. Life would just be living without any values or purpose at all. He looked back over the distance of this line of thought had taken him and decided he'd certainly proved his point. Since the world obviously doesn't function normally when quality is subtracted, quality exists, whether it's defined or not. In this corner, we're following John Vervaeke's work, obviously. So when John Vervaeke is talking about rationality in a new, like a rationality, a rediscovering of a certain kind of rationality, this is what he's talking about. He's talking about a rationality that doesn't just outline what is required for survival. He's talking about a rationality that points us towards living in a way that's good, that imbues our life with quality. Without, at the same time, without ditching all the good stuff that rationality provides. And there's something in this, in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, there's a section where he talks about a spiritual rationality that integrates logic and intuition in a unified way of understanding and operating in the world. If everyone knows what quality is, why is there such disagreement about it? But this argument was completely devastating. Devastating in terms of what... But this argument was completely devastating. Devastating in terms of he thought he had something and now he doesn't. Instead of one single uniform quality, now there appeared to be two qualities, a romantic one, just seeing, which the students had, and a classic one, overall understanding, which the teachers had. And really, the quality he was talking about wasn't classic quality or romantic quality. It was beyond both of them. And by God, it wasn't subjective or objective either. It was beyond both of those categories. And so he rejected the left horn. Quality is not objective, he said. It doesn't reside in the material world. Then he rejected the right horn. Quality is not subjective, he said. It doesn't reside merely in the mind. And finally, Phaedrus, taking a path that to his knowledge had never been taken before in the history of Western thought, went straight between the horns of the subjectivity-objectivity dilemma and said quality is neither part of mind nor is it part of matter. It is a third entity which is independent of the two. So that hadn't been taken in the history of Western thought, but that certainly is inherent in Eastern thought, which is the concept of Tao. Say, let's go back to the beginning of the book. Why Tao was so, why he felt Tao and quality were so interrelated is you don't have top down, God does everything. You don't have bottom up, everything is a particle and evolves from that. You have something where the two are integrated, and that is like Tao. Tao drives you along. Well, actually, let's just talk about the in Eastern you've got the driving along of the way, and then you have the top down good is in this direction. So looking between, like saying that this is a meeting of both, of eminence and emanation, let's say. I mean, that's the way I read it. At least these days I read it that way. I'm heavily influenced by the corner, of course. But like Tao, it pushes you along towards the good, but it's inherent in that pushing along as well. So in terms of Western thought, integrating this Eastern notion, I think, is kind of what he means. Maybe not consciously at the time. Phaedrus wasn't conscious of it at the time, but of course maybe he was, because he had done so much studying in that area. In fact, why was he so drawn to the studying in that area to begin with? And of course, when he sorry, this goes on and on. When he was in Benares, he couldn't get a handle of this. He was too blinded and hypnotized by the Western way of thinking. The world now, according to Phaedrus, was composed of three things: mind, matter, and quality. The fact that he had established no relationship between them didn't bother him at first. If the relationship between mind and matter had been fought over for centuries and wasn't yet resolved, why should he, in a matter of a few weeks, come up with something conclusive about quality? So he let it go. He put it on a kind of mental shelf where he put all kinds of questions he had no immediate answers for. That mental shelf kind of reminds us of, if you read Lila, the writing process with the cards. There was a section, kind of, I don't remember what it's called, but there's a mental shelf section where these ideas that mill around that just have a feeling and intuition that they are quality ideas, but we can't use them right now or put. He knew the metaphysical trinity of subject, object, and quality would sooner or later have to be interrelated. Eventually, he saw that quality couldn't be independently related with either the subject or the object, but could be found only in the relationship of the two with each other. Okay, now this is a very exciting section. That sounded warm. It is the point which subject and object meet. That sounded warm. Quality is not a thing, it's an event. Warmer. It is the event at which the subject becomes aware of the object. And because without objects there can be no subject, because the objects create the subject's awareness of himself. Quality is the event at which awareness of both subjects and objects is made possible. Hot. Now he knew it was coming. This means quality is not just the result of a collision between subject and object. The very existence of subject and object themselves is deduced from the quality event. The quality event is the cause of the subjects and objects, which are mistakenly presumed to be the cause of quality. That is so cool. He's going to explain it a little. He's going to break that down a little bit coming up here. So that's going to, so when you read that, it can be a little bit muddled. It can be a little bit difficult to understand. So the next couple of pages, he's going to break that down and make it a lot easier to understand. The sun of quality, he wrote, does not revolve around subjects and objects of our existence. It does not just passively illuminate them. It is not subordinate to them in any way. It has created them. They are subordinate to it. All right, so when he says it does not revolve around subjects and objects of our existence, that is the implication or the idea we have in our mind that these things are already there, and it's just a matter of us to discover them. This is saying, no, that's absolutely wrong. The fact that they are there is because we have created them, because we have found them to have quality. And therefore we define these things that are created. Let me just go into it. He'd been speculating about the relationship of quality to mind and matter, and had identified quality as the parent of mind and matter, the event which gives birth to mind and matter. This Copernican inversion of the relationship of quality to the objective world could sound mysterious if not carefully explained, but he didn't mean it to be mysterious. He simply meant that the cutting edge of time, before an object can be distinguished, there must be a kind of non-intellectual awareness, which he called awareness of quality. You can't be aware that you've seen a tree until after you've seen the tree. And in between the instant of vision and the instant of awareness, there must be a time lag. We sometimes think of that time lag as unimportant, but there's no justification for thinking that that time lag is unimportant. None whatsoever. There's another way, it's not as good, but it's very similar of explaining this, and that's the wake of a ship. So that's how Alan Watts, in one of his, he does an explanation. It's a later explanation, and it's in color. It's on YouTube. Maybe I'll find it and direct you to it. That he says that the ship moves and it leaves a wake. So the movement of the ship in the moment, or the recognition of quality, isn't where the pattern is, isn't where the object is. After the fact, we realize that we've seen the tree. So the pattern itself, so why we think that the tree was always there is because we earlier, as a species, decided that this particular organic thing is important to us in some way or another. This is how we parse out our reality. There are many ways to parse out reality, but we have decided to parse out trees as independent objects because they're useful to us in some way or another. They get in our way, or whatever the case is. So, but that time lag he's talking about, it's an example. Now we already know what a tree is before, so we reckon. So, but the moment you see a tree, you don't see a tree. You just see, and then quality tells you, because you've already got this idea in your head of a tree, that we've inherited, that it is a tree. But that moment of dynamic recognition, there is no tree. The past exists only in our memories, the future only in our plans. The present is our only reality. The tree that you are aware of intellectually, because of that small time lag, is always in the past, and therefore always unreal. And the way they're describing unreality here is going to be very irritating to rational people. And this is where this kind of explanation in Eastern philosophy especially is what makes Western rationalists thinking that it's a bunch of woo. Any intellectually conceived object is always in the past and therefore unreal. Reality is always the moment of vision before the intellectualization takes place. There is no other reality. This pre-intellectual reality is what Phaedrus felt he had properly identified as quality. Since all intellectually identifiable things must emerge from this pre-intellectual quality, quality is the parent, the source of all subjects and objects. So hopefully that makes it a little bit more easy to understand what he means by quality being the only reality, quality being the source of subjects and objects. The quality he was teaching was not just part of reality, it was the whole thing. In our highly complex organic state, we advanced organisms respond to our environment with an invention of many marvelous analogs. That's what I was trying to say with that whole explanation of the tree, and how we decide that the tree is something that is important to us. We invent earth and heavens, trees, stones, and oceans, gods, music, arts, language, philosophy, engineering, civilization, and science. We call these analogs reality, and they are reality. These are the patterns we live by, this reality. These patterns that we've created, that we've decided matter, that we've decided have meaning, worth, value to us, are reality. We mesmerize our children in the name of truth, knowing that they are reality, and that's going back to that hypnosis in chapter 3 of, that hypnotizing our children in class. We throw anyone who does not accept these analogs into an insane asylum. That, of course, is a big part of Feeders's beef. But that which causes us to invent analogs is quality. Quality is the continuing, I love this. This is really, really useful for understanding quality. Quality is the continuing stimulus which our environment puts upon us to create the world we live in. All of it. Every last bit of it. And in that definition, in that description of quality, you can, and in that description of quality, you're going to be able to infer emanation and eminence in this little corner of the internet, by the way. He began to see that he had shifted away from his original stand. He was no longer talking about a metaphysical trinity, but an absolute monism. Quality was the source and substance of everything. And I think, of course, it would be very interesting in this little corner to do a comparison and contrast with this understanding of quality and the trinity. Value, the leading edge of reality, is no longer an irrelevant offshoot of structure. Value is the predecessor of structure. It is the pre-intellectual awareness that gives rise to it. Our structured reality is pre-selected on the basis of value, and really to understand structured reality requires an understanding of the value source from which it's derived. So I think in that paragraph, there's not really, it's very self-explanatory in terms of the role of value in creating our world. I think this is a really great way to put it, but I think that it's important to acknowledge the importance of value. In this paragraph, he's indicating that what you believe to be a structure that's always there, that's always present, and it's just a matter of us scientifically figuring out what it is, that metaphysics is just pushed aside. And this is a different metaphysics that says we kind of create our own reality based on what is valuable to us. It's really in this paragraph. And maybe that explains why. Maybe that explains the double slit experiment, right? If you want to build a factory or fix a motorcycle or set a nation right without getting stuck, then classical, structured, dualistic subject-object knowledge, although necessary, isn't enough. You have to have some feeling for the quality of the work. You have to have a sense of what's good. That is what carries you forward. So how about that as an implication as to where we're going with technology, and how something like AI really has to come from a stance, we're programming this stuff. But in order we can't just say this is what makes sense, this is what's logical, this is what's rational to do in terms of technology or AI. You don't want to do what's reasonable but not any good. So you really have to be thinking about technology as something that has the Buddhas existing within and without, that it has to be high quality, that it has to come from a place of what is good. And you don't just mistake the fact that technology is so classic, so classically, classic quality, let's say, that's so structured as something that is already there, that you just want to increase in a logical way. Does this kind of make sense? You have to come at it as if you are creating something of high quality. Otherwise, it Otherwise, you know what the implications are. If something, I mean, AI can take us over if we're not. AI can drown us out with its low quality if we're not careful. Quality, value creates the subjects and objects of the world. The facts do not exist until value has created them. The real cycle you're working on is a cycle called yourself. The machine that appears to be out there and the person that appears to be in here are not two separate things. They grow toward or fall away from quality together. So that's the point I'm making about technology. You can have it grow towards quality or fall away from quality. The meaning crisis is falling away from quality. All right, now I love this paragraph, and this is an important, if we want to integrate Pirsig into the little corner, into our little corner, this is an important paragraph. Religion isn't invented by man. Men are invented by religion. Men invent responses to quality, and among these responses is an understanding of what they themselves are. You know something, and then the quality stimulus hits you, and then you try to define the quality stimulus. But to define it, all you've got to work with is what you know. So your definition is made up of what you know. It's an analog to what you already know. It has to be. It can't be anything else. So does that make sense? Early man, let's just say, over a period of time, was hit by quality. What is quality to, take themselves out of biological, have more security, and then, start to discover predictive quality to it. And the predictive quality, let's just say, this is one way of looking at it, gives birth to some desire to believe things on a deeper level. And that desire to believe things on a deeper level gives rise to a sense of maybe oneness with something, and maybe understanding God arises from that. If you're a religious person, you're going to say that God pushed himself through and into our consciousness. I think they both mean the same thing. So let me read this letter. This is the last part. There's an interview, a little section from an interview, but this is the last part because it relates to this. Quality and God. This is a letter, March 22nd, 1992. Quality and God are the same, except quality is never said to have whiskers or throw lightning bolts. And I don't think that anyone in this little corner thinks God has whiskers and throws lightning bolts. I mean, you could say that lightning bolts are thrown by God, but on a different understanding, not as a person in the sky doing that. Nobody denies that there is a quality. That is, some things are better than something else. You never have to decide whether you believe in quality. How can you ignore it? And this has become my understanding of God, is that the fact that there is something drawing you toward the better, something propelling you from the bottom and drawing you from the top towards the better, is God in that dynamic system. That is God. God is operating, evolving you bottom up towards emergence and informing that emergence top down. Okay, so the last part, which is before this, but I wanted to read that, for obvious reasons. Interview, Washington Post, 1974. For you, quality may be Kant. For me, it's a hamburger. Regardless, we both want quality. I'm trying to make the classic concepts more relevant today, helping people lead more imaginative, productive lives. The problem today is that one has to succeed in some terrible chain of values. Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance just says, be true to your own interests in terms of quality. If you can go in your own basement and fix your motorcycle, that's fine. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot something important which is related to that in the last section. The place to improve the world is first in one's own heart and head and hands, and then work outward from there. And I think this is what religion and practice and spiritual practices and however you want to characterize them in Christianity, of course, imitation of Christ. You want to become a better person so that you can implement quality in the world. And there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, ultimately, that's what all these practices come down to. So I hope that makes sense, and I will see you next time.